just unboxed this cordless Makita 10¼ inch rear handle saw, and I want to see if it can keep up with my corded Skilsaw called a Sasquatch. It's also a 10¼ inch saw. First impressions versus proven performance. Let's see if cordless technology is finally good enough to go full cordless. What we have here is a brand spanking new 10¼ inch Makita saw. I also have my tried and true Steady Eddie, I call it. Now, obviously this blade is hammered, as well as this saw. It's been well used. I've had this saw longer than cordless 10-inch saws have been available, but Makita was kind enough to send us this one because I asked them to, and they wanted us to do a review on it. So I thought, why not check it? This is a 40-volt technology saw versus a standard 110 plug-in saw. So I'm gonna set this guy to the side. We're gonna talk about the features of this saw really quick. First of all, for safety, always pull your battery, right? There are some cool features on it. There's a lot of standard stuff as well. Obviously, you have your lever right here for your depth of cut, and that locks in just like standard. There's also an onboard tool, which I always like, even though, you know, we have squares and things like that. There's your front. This is probably one of my favorite features of the Makita style saws. When you loosen your front plate to do your bevel cuts, it has a locking mechanism at 45. But if you set it back to 0, you can turn this knob and you can actually go all the way up to a 58-degree angle, which a lot of times you might be cutting over a 45. So regardless if you're in that 45 or if you have to go to 56, 58, whatever, it can go all the way to 58 degrees, which I've had to use in the past. Okay, we can go back to 0. We can also lock it on a 22.5, which is obviously two 22.5 degree angles, becomes a 45-degree angle. So that's a very common cut, especially in my world. But for today, we're just gonna put it in the standard 90-degree mode and leave it there with a 45-degree cut. Okay, depth of cut is over 3.5 inches, which is cool because you can make a full pass on a piece of 3.5 inch material. A lot of times 4x4s are gonna be 3 5/8 if they're wet. So let's see what the actual depth of cut is. And it's 3 3/4. So that's really nice that this will cut actually maybe even over 3 3/4. It might actually cut 3 13/16. That's awesome to have that ability. Now I have put a 9.5 inch blade on a 10¼ inch saw before, but they do make 10¼ inch blades, which gives you that little extra depth of cut. There's a couple indicators when you're cutting, 0 degrees and 45 degrees right here. So you use this notch if you're cutting a straight line, and you'll use this notch if you're cutting on a 45-degree line. Sometimes I also go off the blade instead of these, but if it's accurate to your cut line, then sometimes those are really convenient to use. There's also a dust extraction port right here with a cover that you can take off for your vacuum. They do make a vacuum for this type of tool and some others as well. We aren't gonna really use that very often. For interior use, it's great. And with that is a Bluetooth module that you can add with the Bluetooth vacuum that you plug into here. And what that does is it allows you to run the vacuum simultaneously. So when you pull the trigger, it will also turn on the vacuum, so you're not having to switch the vacuum on every time you need to make a cut with the saw. Probably technology I'm not gonna use, but it's still there. There's that rafter hook, like I said, it's wider. Looks like it'll hit a double set of or a double joist or a double wall. Not quite. So it's mostly for singles. Oh, and then your blade lock shaft is right here. So that locks your blade in place when you're doing your blade changes. That's a pretty firm spring in there. So you gotta really push in on it and hold it in while you're loosening your nut. The nut itself is nice because not only does it have that 10mm or whatever size this is on it. Okay, my square also fits it. But it also has a hex head on the inside, like an Allen key. So you have a couple different ways to remove that nut, which I've had to use in the past because I didn't happen to have what I needed to take that off. Okay, so for this test, we're gonna go ahead and run this saw. I haven't used it yet. It's brand spanking new. We're gonna make a couple cuts with it, do some first impressions. We're gonna rip a little bit out of this 4x4, and then we're gonna go ahead and change the blade onto the red saw, the Sasquatch, and then we're gonna see if we notice any difference or if there's a significant amount of difference between the two. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but there's also a handle. Now this handle's interesting, it's reverse thread. I guess that's just because when you're cutting, maybe you have a tendency to roll your hand forward or grab it and push. So kind of interesting how they decided to put a reverse threaded handle on the saw. I don't know if it makes much of a difference, but you know, that's what engineers are for, not me. There's also integrated into the plate of the saw, there's a place that you can get like an aftermarket rip kit where you can have a slidable fence guide. If you're doing a lot of plywood or sheet goods or something like that, you can stick this in here, and then there's a little nut that tightens down on that. I'm sure it's an accessory that you can obtain as well. And a top handle as well for when you're cutting and you want to grab that versus using this handle here. This handle is easily removable for storage or whatever. We're just going to leave it on for now. I think that's about it. So let's go ahead. We're gonna put a freshly charged 40-volt battery on this bad boy. There it is. And then we'll go ahead and clamp this 4x4 to the table, and we're just gonna make a couple cuts with it and see what our first impressions are, okay? We're just gonna make a couple lines in this 4x4. And the cool thing is, again, you're able to make a cut through this 4x4 in one pass. Oh, there is a safety trigger lockout as well. So I can't pull the trigger unless I push this button to the right or to the left. It's a little bit annoying, but I get it. You get used to it after a while. You know, you just automatically kind of push in on it before you pull the trigger. When you first start using this kind of a tool, it's a little bit of an annoyance, but it's like anything, habit. So here we go. So it has a brake on it as well, which is nice. That cut through that really easy. Easy cuts, easy cuts. All right, so that was a pretty nice clean cut. Let's draw a line. Let's just say we need to rip, you know, a certain amount of distance off of this board. Whoops. Let's go ahead and rip that line. Sometimes when I'm cutting lengthwise, I might pull my guard up because if I try to do it this way, the guard's gonna catch and it makes it a little more difficult. We can also, there's other techniques that guys use sometimes where they actually leave the plate off or unlocked. They leave the base plate unlocked so they can do this with their saw. A lot of framers do that. I'm just gonna pull up the guard on this one and not leave the base plate unlocked. So let me know in the comments how you guys use it. Sometimes I do, if I'm making a lot of stringer cuts, I might leave the base plate unlocked because I'm doing a lot of plunging into materials, and it just depends. Just depends on what I'm doing with it. Okay, the bottom of our post is a little bit soft, but man, that ripped right through it. The saw's working perfect. It's cutting all the way through it. It's cutting right through the 4x4, either way, ripping or cross cutting. Let's change the blade and let's put it on the other saw and let's see how it compares to what we just did with this saw. All right, guys, so I don't know how many of you actually know a lot about these saws, but this particular Skilsaw has a diamond knockout. So for me to use the exact same blade for this test, I had to pull the diamond knockout out of the blade. So now this blade is only good for this saw. It's not good for this saw anymore because this one doesn't require a diamond knockout. It just requires a standard hole like this one. So what we did was, to be fair for the test, because we're trying to be as fair as possible, we went ahead and sacrificed the blade to put on this saw only, all right? And so now this Makita blade is dedicated to this Skilsaw, which is kind of funny. So I did happen to have a couple of decent Norsk blades. They're a 36 tooth though, so they have more teeth. So we didn't feel like it'd be a fair comparison. So we went ahead and put that 10 1/4 blade on this particular saw. Now we're gonna go ahead and rip. Now I'll be honest again, the saw's a little old. It's always felt a little underpowered, in my opinion. I have cut some really big beams with this saw. I've cut 6x, which is still a double cut. But what's cool about a 10-inch saw is you can make a double cut on a 6x and cut it twice. So like if I'm cutting a big glulam beam and it's a 6-inch wide, I can make one cut on one side, one cut on the other, and then the beam will fall. And I only have one seam I gotta deal with versus trying to cut with a regular Skilsaw, cutting through the whole thing, and then trying to take a reciprocating saw and cut through the middle of it. Same goes for a 6x6. I actually have a chunk of it over here. We may even try to see if we can double cut the 6x6, which is sitting underneath this blades right here. Now this is a synthetic 6x6. So this is gonna bog down this saw for sure. So maybe we'll go ahead and pull that test as soon as we get done testing this wood, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and fire this up. She's a little archaic, but she's always gotten the job done for me, okay? Once we plug it into power, we'll conduct our test. And that's one really cool thing about cordless tools is this right here. All right, here we go. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the guard, and here we go. That's a lot more difficult with this saw. Okay, just for giggles, guys, even though this has more teeth and it's a brand new blade, I'm just gonna go ahead and run another cut with this, okay? Here we go. Okay, that did take a little more effort than the first cut because there's more teeth on the blade, but it's still cut easier than it did with this saw here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and make a few cross cuts with the saw. Okay, the saw wasn't set to depth all the way. Let's try again. I would say that it cross-cut almost the same. It was pretty good. I didn't notice much of a difference in the cross-cut. I would say that the cordless, the 40 volt, is a little bit smoother, but it's a lot newer too. So I can only give you what I have available. Nobody reached out and wanted to give us a corded 10-inch version. If there is somebody out there that wants to do that, I didn't hear anybody. Send us the tool and we'll put it in the lineup. You know, for a corded tool, for as old as it is and as many times as it's been out in the weather, it's still not a bad option. I'll be honest, I really do like this Makita saw a lot better. It's just fresher. It winds up a little bit faster. It feels like this thing's on a 15 amp circuit. It's pulling all 15 amps and it's really trying to draw as much power as it can, and it's still bogging down a little bit. You probably noticed in the video with this higher tooth blade, you're gonna get a finer cut, but you're also gonna bog the saw down a little bit more, especially when you're ripping. And remember, we're ripping through 3.5 inches of material. So you're asking a lot of the saw to do that. So that's not something we're gonna do every day, but we will do it to notch posts and things like that. So it can be an accurate way of doing so. That's with a real wood 4x4. Now let's try a plastic 6x6. This is gonna be really difficult on the saw. We're just gonna do a full plunge cut into this 6x6. And this time it's not gonna really matter if we do a cross cut or we rip, because the material doesn't have grain. It has extrusion, but I don't think that it's gonna impede if we rip it this way or this way. Your cross-cutting and ripping is gonna be kind of the same on the blade. So we're just gonna cross-cut for giggles, so I think I can get the saw to fit. We'll start with the Skilsaw, the Sasquatch. Thing is, remember, I've got less teeth on this blade, so this saw might do just as good, if not better, than the other saw with a higher tooth blade. So here we go. Okay, that wasn't terrible. You saw it started to bind up, but that's probably because the plastic's getting hot and all the sawdust that it's creating is starting to bind the blade. And so if you move the blade up and down a little bit while you're cutting, you can avoid some of that. All right, here we go with the Makita. Okay, that ripped right through it. Didn't really bind up too much. Trying to be as fair with the blades here as we can, but if I had to choose one of those two saws, I'm gonna take this one. It did a really good job getting through that material. The hotter this stuff gets, the worse it's gonna be to try and cut. And you can see the sawdust, it makes quite a mess when you're cutting, but both saws did the function. I just feel that this saw is gonna do it a little bit better. That's my 2 cents, guys. So if you like this video, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and leave a comment below and let me know what you guys think of these two saws. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.